Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Now this one, you probably know from clicking on the thumbnail, is going to be a little bit different. Normally my top 10s are wrestling related or wrestling adjacent. This one's going to be outside of the world of wrestling. Because it is about, at the time of recording, about a week or so before Halloween. When this video releases, it'll be just a few days before it. I decided we're going to do a top 10 of my favorite horror movies. I know there's probably going to be some people that flame me in the comments. I'm very loose on the definition of a horror movie. A thriller is going to be in there. There's going to be slashers. There's going to be straight up old horrors. Some with a little bit of a tinge of comedy in them. With that being said, I did have one restriction I put myself in for the list. For this, I will only consider one movie in a franchise. So in other words, let's say a movie has 7 sequels, 2 reboots, whatever it may be, I'm not going to do them all. Similarly, if a movie's been remade, I'm only going to do one of those. So basically, because there's some movies, some franchises, that if I didn't limit that, they would take up the majority of the list. And some movies that I like the reboot and I like the original, so they would be on the list as well. With that being said, let's jump right into it. Number 10, Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight. Coming to us from 1995. I'm going to mention the years because of the reasons I just said, because of the reboots, because of a lot of times there's movies with the same name that aren't even related. If you haven't seen this, this was the first foray of Tales from the Crypt to make a movie. They made 2, they made this and Bordello of Blood, which, if you follow Tales from the Crypt, it's kind of an anthology series. I like the setup of this with the Crypt Keeper being the director of the movie and directing a movie about this. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a very fun movie. It very much took the more serious nature of the show. At times, Tales from the Crypt could be very serious or very, very goofy, and this was more on the serious tip. Bordello of Blood was a little bit more on the goofy side. I enjoyed the story with them hunting for the demon's blood, and that being that, I like the idea of being confined into one place, the different characters, the criminal, the prostitute, and how you have preconceived notions of these people, but you get to see them in a different light. I liked a lot of what they did here. The only thing I was a little bit disappointed at the end, it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, which I'm trying not to spoil as much of these movies as I can if you haven't seen any of them. That would be the only disappointment I have, but overall, I thought it was a fantastic movie. So going from that, our number 9. Definitely the oldest movie on the list, and one of the movies I absolutely love. And I only picked one from this genre. I could probably pick 2 or 3 others, and we're talking about Dracula, the Bela Lugosi version from 1931. I could pick the Wolfman and Frankenstein, the Invisible Man, all the old Universal horror characters. All those movies to me are fantastic. I love them. I love the stories. I love the characters. It's, to me, it really defined what horror could be and what it should be. And if you watch this now, you see a lot of the tropes of the vampire movies that would come after this. There's several versions of the Dracula character, Bram Stoker's Dracula in the 90s. In the 60s, we had the Hammer horror films with Christopher Lee as Dracula, which those are fantastic as well. But this, the Bela Lugosi Dracula, I feel like it set the template for what vampires would be, thematically, stylistically, how they respond, how the world sees them, along with being a fantastic movie in its own right. They could have never made another vampire movie, and this would stand the test of time as one of the great movies of all time. As you can see, it's 90 years old, and it's still on my list here. I really love this movie, especially when I first started seeing it would be on very old, when it was running on TV on Saturdays, or when TNT did, or Turner, they did their classic movies, they would run it every now and then. Just a fantastic movie. Again, one that you should definitely watch if you're a horror aficionado. I wouldn't call myself a horror aficionado, but it's one that I would say you should watch even if you're not a huge fan of horror movies. Now, coming from that, our number 8, Scream from 1996, the first one in the series. I like this movie because it took what had become tropes for the slasher type genre and turned them on their head. Arguably the biggest star going into the movie, Drew Barrymore. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. Drew Barrymore dies within like 10 minutes of the movie starting. And then you got a bunch of characters. Courtney Cox has some fame off of Friends, but for the most part they were unknowns at that time. Like David Arquette wasn't quite known yet. Different things, and it was a really fun show, fun movie. I call it a show. I was thinking about Friends there for a second. I like how it took the twists on the genre, and then even in the movie, Jamie Kennedy's character talks about the different tropes that are attached to horror movies and how to get around them. To me, I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable. Some of the sequels I haven't liked as much, but this one, it definitely stands the test of time for me. I go from that, our number 7, Saw from 2004. The original one, the one that would start the quote-unquote torture porn horror movies, in my opinion. This was great. The fact that it all takes place in one room, mostly, and the psychology of it, and the different twists and turns, and everything about this, and what it puts you definitely into that, what would you do if you were in this position? And it kind of, when you watch the rest of the Saw franchise, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really great movies in the Saw franchise, but they kind of took and kept raising the bar on the difficulties of their traps, where this was more simplistic. It was more story-driven and how badly can we torture people driven. I thought this was a thoroughly fantastic movie. As you see, it started a franchise. I believe they're on their 9th movie now, or they're about to have their 9th movie. It started a change in genres and changes to the horror movies in general. For that, I definitely think it deserves to be on my list. Our number 6, one of the few actual sequels to make the list. Friday the 14th, number 4, The Final Chapter, which we know isn't the final chapter, from way back in 1984. I love Jason Voorhees as a character. I love the Friday the 13th movies. I know some of them are goofy. I know some of them are hokey. To me, this was the perfect one. You introduce the Tommy Jarvis character, which in this one's played by Corey Feldman, who has an absolutely fantastic role here. I really enjoyed this, and it was supposed to be the last time we see Jason. This was supposed to be the end of him. 20 years later, he's still showing up, so I don't think that they followed through. And there have been a couple of these where they said it's the last time, the end of Jason. There have been reboots. There have been, the movie with Freddy versus Jason. There have been a lot done with his character. I thought, in my point, this was where they got the character the best, where he made his best impression. He really isn't in the first movie. The second movie, it felt like they were getting their footing with him. The third movie, he kind of was doing what he did. Here is where I think they got him perfectly. After this, it kind of got to a little bit of a campy, more, how could I say this, not so much a serious role. He wasn't taken as serious from then on. But in my opinion, like I said, this is my favorite of the franchise. That's why it makes the list. And I love the whole franchise. I love Friday the 13th. They're fantastic movies. For the most part, there's some stinkers in there, don't get me wrong. Next up, our number 5, another sequel, and this is probably the funniest movie on the list. Army of Darkness, aka the third movie in the Evil Dead trilogy. I could easily put any of these 3 movies on here. I thought they were fantastic, and this is from 1992. I like the setting. I like that they went back to medieval times. I like the stop motion animation. Even at the time, it looked terrible, but it was still acceptable because of Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams is one of those characters. It's one of the great characters in the history of horror, and probably one of the great characters in the history of movie, if you ask me. I love the Evil Dead movies. I love his character arc. I love Ash vs. the Evil Dead, the show that came off of this. I just think he's just a fantastic actor in a fantastic role. And this, to me, I know it was there was a lot of comedic value in this. It kind of felt like one of the old Three Stooges horror movies, horror crossovers. and it felt like there was a lot of slapstick, but still kept within the horror genre. For me, that's why it makes the list, because it's a fantastic movie, in my opinion. Now, going from that, our number 4, from 1980, The Shining. This is the one starring Jack Nicholson, and Jack puts on one of his greatest performances in this movie. It's a tale of a haunted hotel with hires a new gatekeeper to keep for the winter, and his slow descent into madness. Is it the hotel that's driving him mad? Was he already mad? Or some of the things he's seeing already in his head? It's a fantastic telling and a fantastic story of a family's journey, with one of the matriarchs of the family going absolutely insane and driven to madness. And I know I've said that 3 times or 4 times now, but there's no other better way to do this. Jack Nicholson absolutely gives a tour de force performance here. Fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend checking it out. And if you haven't seen it, you've seen it parodied a million times, because everybody parodies this. It's a great movie. It's one of the great movies, as you can see, in the genre of all time. Now, going from that, our number 3, from 1982, The Thing, the John Carpenter version. This was a remake of a movie from the 60s, or actually I think from the 50s, and I loved this. And much like I said with Jack Nicholson, we had Kurt Russell puts on a great performance here, one of Kurt Russell's great performances. The Thing being an undefined alien force, and spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, and being able to take form of anybody, take over anybody's body. It really added to the suspense, the isolation, the cold, everything about it, much like The Shining. That feeling that you're trapped there, and everybody knows that feeling of being freezing cold, of being scared, of having nowhere to run. Everybody can relate to that feeling, and this movie really brought it out. In my opinion, one of the great movies of the 1980s, one of John Carpenter's best movies. I love John Carpenter. He made They Live and the Halloween movie and some others, but he was a fantastic director. Still is. I believe he's still making movies now. This was an absolutely astounding movie. I definitely recommend checking this one out. I keep saying that, I know, but if you haven't seen it, definitely go and look for this and find it and check it out. Now, going from that, our number 2, one of the horror classics of all time, Psycho from 1960. Much like I said with the other 2, the last 2, this is all based on the performance of the main actor, and I'm gonna have to put it here in the thing because his name's slipping my mind right now, but yeah, it'll be down here. Playing Norman Bates. I can only think of him as Norman Bates right now for some reason, because his role was so great, and everything about this, a lot of the violence happens off screen, so your brain fills it in as way more violent than it was, or probably that they would have been ever able to get away with. This is Alfred Hitchcock at his absolute best, in my opinion. Just the Norman Bates character, and I know, again, spoilers if you haven't seen a 62-year-old movie. The relationship with him and his mother, the psychological damage, again, much like The Shining, this shows us a character and how he's portrayed and how he became what he was, and to me, just one of the fantastic movies, one of the absolute great. I would say this is more of a thriller than a horror movie, but one of the movies that really set the template to what a thriller could be. Now, before we get to our number 1, if you haven't seen our shows before, we do a little thing here called The Best of the Rest. Basically, these are movies that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, from 1987, the original Hellraiser. I know they just did a remake. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet. I know it's getting mixed reviews. The original one got mixed reviews. Hellraiser was one of those movies that, growing up as a kid in the 80s and early 90s, everybody watched. Everybody traded this video cassette around. A lot of kids' parents didn't let them watch it because it was so violent, and it's funny watching now because it's not as violent as it was led to be, or as there's a lot more violent movies here. The whole thing with the box and Pinhead, it's just a fantastic movie. He's a fantastic villain. A lot of these movies are carried by their villains, and he's one of the most charismatic ones, if that makes sense. And there was a lot of imagery, a lot of, I guess you could say, bondage or S&M imagery in the movie. It's really just a fantastic movie. It's one you should definitely check out. Now, from that, next on our best of the rest, Final Destination from 2000. Because of this movie, I still don't like to drive between a truck that has timber or logs on it or trees, whatever you want to call it. I don't like to drive behind those trucks just because of this movie. The effect of you have a time that you're supposed to go, and that storyline, and how if you cheat death is still going to find a way to find you. I thought it was all fantastic. It launched a series. I thought it was great. Each one had diminishing returns, but this first movie, I thought, in my opinion, was really great. Last but not least on the best of the rest, from 1996, From Dusk Till Dawn. This is Robert Rodriguez working with Quentin Tarantino, who's in the movie, and it's a story, it's a vampire story. It's set much like a lot of these movies in one building. You get the isolation factor of it, you get the whole absurdity of it. Of course, there's some comedy to it. Not as much. I mean, it's a serious movie with a little bit of comedic overtones. Just a fantastic movie, and just a nice descent into one night in some people's lives who gets totally changed. The antagonists are brutal murderers, so it's a whole trip, and it's very much in the vein of Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino and what they do. And this was just a fantastic movie. I really enjoyed it. Now, before we get into our number one, if you think I put a movie too high, put one down too low, left some movies off altogether, I know there's going to be a lot of you that your favorite horror movie isn't on this list. Let me know what you think. Let me know down here in the comments. Our number one movie of the list, from 1978, Halloween. I know there was a couple slasher films before this, but to me this was really when the slasher film took mold and became the most popular form of horror at this time. It creates, to me, the most iconic, or one of the most iconic characters in horror history in Michael Myers. Jamie Lee Curtis is absolutely amazing in the role of the quote-unquote damsel in distress, even though she's more of a badass than we've ever seen at the time frame. The whole setting, the feeling, the ambiance, the music, the fact that it's set in during Halloween, which kind of gives a little bit of that eeriness to it. It just feels like when you go outside and you feel the cold weather and the leaves coming down, you could feel that coming through in the movie. And Michael Myers, in this movie especially, before he became more of a supernatural force, and don't get me wrong, I love most of the Halloween movies. To me, this felt grounded in a reality that a lot of them lost. And yeah, I know there's some fantastical elements here, but Michael Myers felt like he could be a real person. And there was a couple things that he had almost like a childlike mentality. The little things with how he moved around, how he hid, how he put on the ghost costume at one point. It kind of felt like this was a guy that never got over his childhood and was stuck in Arrested Development. And that's why part of what made him who he was. I really love this movie. I'm probably going to watch it again here on Halloween. I enjoy it. I need to watch the newest one before I watch this. I keep putting off watch the newest one, Halloween Ends, I believe it's called. I just haven't had the time to sit down and watch it. I really want to, though, because the last two have been rather good, and I know I've read some, back and forth about it being good and bad. But I definitely want to check it out just because I watched every other movie in the series, so why not watch this one? I really enjoyed this. I thought it was awesome. I thought it laid the groundwork for a lot of things that would come after it. The Freddys, the Jasons, all the movies. There was a lot of slasher films in the 80s that kind of took this template and ran with it. To me, not the first slasher, but the first Halloween is the most perfect horror movie there's ever been. It's got just enough scares to it without being overly gory, without being overly fake. There's a lot of movies where they step up the gore factor, and when they step that up, it kind of draws me back because it makes it fake. It desensitizes you in a way. Where this, if you felt the psychology of it, you felt the dread, and a lot of that goes to the fantastic score by by John Carpenter himself. The music in this is so great. I mean, the Halloween theme song is one of the great scores, or one of the great theme songs in the history of movies. Again, my favorite horror movie of all time. I could probably go on for another 2 hours gushing about it, but I won't, just because I know you guys probably don't want to hear me do that. With all that being said, let's smash that like button, subscribe, share the video, and if you made it all the way to the end, let's put instead of your favorite horror movie, let's put your favorite horror movie character in the comments. And if you think I left a movie off the list, there's a movie you like better than all these, you put something too high, something too low, let me know in the comment. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.